Welcome back to our show. As promised, today we are sharing some stories from some things that have happened in the last few weeks with some of our students. We did get an email recently that asked how we work with individual students since we are a group program. So I think this podcast is really the best way to answer that question because you can see all the ways we work as individual kids, how every kiddo we kind of have our own strategy and our own way of talking to them and working with them and all the different situations and scenarios that come up. So I think, this podcast is really the best way to see how we work with individual students and individual situations, even though we are a group program. And the whole point of our program is the concept of the group. But this week or today, this is actually our third recording this week. We just got a little bit behind and wanted to get a little more caught up. Today, we're going to focus on just some individual stories that have happened in the last couple of weeks to show, always helping kids problem solve. That's always at the center of what we do. But also helping kids with conflict resolution, helping kids giving and receiving feedback, just helping our kids be more socially successful in general. That's our plan for today. First up, we have two different stories, both revolving around Uno, and I think mostly the same students. So it was situations that happened on 2 different weeks. The first one, I'm going to let Ramiro tell that one because he was directly involved in that one.
Yes. So in this group, there were 4 students playing Uno. There was one student who, I'm actually going to touch on this real quick. In our last episode, we had talked a lot about how sometimes students have big reactions or they intentionally, like try to cry or like present themselves in a way that needs like a lot of attention from their parents or from teachers or something like that. This student started out that way when he first started coming to Starfish. During his initial interview, a lot of that is what we saw.
Very big reactions during his initial interview.
Yeah. And
which the initial interview is just us. There aren't other kids here. It's just us meeting a new student and their parent or parents. And yeah, 2 times in the 45-minute interview, there were some pretty big things coming from him.
Yeah.
And actually, I had the concern as to how he would do here because he was having such big reactions to things.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was August?
It was.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're now in April.
Yes. So from August to April, he, in my opinion, I'm sure Steph would agree, he has been soaking up what we teach him like a sponge, especially when it comes to having big reactions in that way to get attention.
I would say from August to October.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly. I think I can remember one time that he had a reaction and it wasn't even that big. I can't think of a time in the mix of the other kids that he's had a reaction like he had when we met him.
Yeah.
I can just think of one time where he got upset and was trying to get attention by crying and that kind of thing. And when we didn't pay attention to it, he came to you and told him what he was bothered by, and then you guys worked through it. And then since then, he either hasn't been bothered by things or he's been able to give other kids feedback about it.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing about the student is I think he has like a leadership personality where, especially like during game time, he loves taking the lead in games or like showing people how to play new games or tweaking the rules a little bit just to like make it more fun or something like that. So like he has like I guess like a bolder personality than some of the students that he typically plays with. And so in this group of Uno, another student had recently joined, and she also, I would say, has a bolder personality where she likes to lead the group, or she'll, change rules or, do something in a way that, that not gives her control, but she is seen as a leader to the other students. And so this day in particular, this was 2 weeks ago now, both of these students were both playing Uno. along with a couple of other students, and this student, I guess both of these students, were playing Uno with different rules. So basically, like, if you don't have a card that matches, student, I'm trying to, okay. If you don't have the card that matches, the student that we're talking about plays in a way where you just keep on grabbing cards from the pile until you have a card that matches. While student B has always played where if you don't have a card that matches, then she just grabs one card. And if that one still doesn't match, then you just move on to the next person. So,
And that's common in Uno.
mhm,
People play their different ways, in Uno. We have kids who come and try to stack, and we have,
right, yeah,
so having your own rules in Uno is really common. The challenge is that the kids don't realize that different people play by different rules.
mhm,
And so we actually keep the rules to all the games that we have here,
mhm,
so that if there's ever a conflict or disagreement, we can refer to the actual rules of the game.
mhm,
But this comes up a lot during Uno specifically,
yeah,
because people create so many different ways to play.
yeah, exactly. And so I know that this was an issue for the main student that we're talking about, and he had agreed with the other students that after that round, they were going to stop and discuss the rules and establish like what was going to be played and what wasn't going to be played. Um, and so they all agreed to continue after that round. And once that round was over, I thought that they had discussed the rules, and it had appeared to be the general consensus of that group that they had established which rules they were going to play with and which ones they weren't. And so that round had started, and this main student um, was trying to get the attention of the other students to clarify more rules again. But I think just the nature of game time, the other students were talking to each other, they were going back and forth. Other students were coming in and out of the room, and like, so naturally, this student A was not the only person talking and wasn't necessarily being heard by the other students. Not intentionally. It wasn't because they were trying to ignore him or anything. It was just the nature of game time. And so at a certain point, this student A, he he like he started yelling, and he exclaimed loudly, "You're not listening to me." And at that point, another student who was in the group, who also tends to have bigger reactions, who we've talked about before, had a big reaction to him having a big reaction. And so student A had a big reaction. It was okay, yeah. It was big reaction back and forth for like 10 seconds in between these two students. And so out of nowhere, it had all just spiraled. Um, and so I came in and knew that I needed to help facilitate, because it wasn't going to happen with these two students going back and forth, having big reactions. And so I said, okay, hang on 1 second. What happened? And student A told me that they weren't listening to him, and that he still didn't know what rules were being played. And the other students had, at that point, they had heard all the big reactions, and they all had like wide eyes, and they were kind of like frozen because they didn't know what to do with those big reactions. And so I said, okay, look at their faces, look at how they're reacting based on you guys yelling and having big reactions. And I asked those other students, do you want to keep on playing with someone who has big reactions like that? And they're like, no, we don't want to talk with them, we don't want to play with them. And so I told student A, I was like, okay, so now that you see that this is how other students will react when you have big reactions like that, what can we try differently? um and he at that point is when he explained that um that he was confused by the rules still, and that they never established what was going to be played. And so I asked the other students in the group, and I said, okay, can we still pause and talk about these rules, because he doesn't know which rules are being played and which ones aren't. And they're like, yeah, but we already did that though. And so my thought was, okay, maybe they had explained them really quickly, and then they just continued on and didn't really give the student A an opportunity to tell his side or tell his rules that he wanted to play with. And so at that point, it had all, calmed down a little bit, and they were able to have a good discussion as to which rules were going to be played, which rules weren't going to be played. And student A was able to explain his side of like why he was frustrated, and like why he wanted to play with a certain rules that the other students didn't want to play with. Ultimately, they all ended up agreeing on the rules, and they had agreed to intentionally listen more for each other in the group in case they had to pause again, or in case someone had a question, instead of just continuing on regardless of like the other people in the group. I guess if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a couple weeks ago now, so I'm trying to remember to the best of my ability like how it all played out. But ultimately, yeah, it was just a matter of helping him process through that it wasn't intentional on the other student's part for not listening to him during the game, that it was just the nature of game time, and that he wasn't the only person who was talking at that time. And so being able to touch on that, as well as him realizing that having those big reactions is not helpful. Even if he is frustrated or if he's upset with something, the best way to handle that would be to give assertive feedback. And if that doesn't work, then to ask me or ask Steph or ask another student for help in that situation. So that way the issue can be resolved without having to resort to the yelling or crying, or just ultimately like having a big reaction to something.
And one thing that's always really interesting to me here is even when things like this happen and students yell, students cry, students, sometimes we have kids who throw things or, whatever, the other kids get over it so quickly.
Hmm.
It actually surprises me how quickly the other kids have just moved on.
Yeah.
They don't talk about it. They don't say anything about it. I think, our kids have so many shared experiences. And, we talk about that sometimes in the classes, that we've all overreacted to things before. We've all said things that have hurt other people's feelings. We've, just these shared experiences that we all have. So I think in our setting, when there's students who have moments like that, in the moment, the other students may be shocked or
Mhm.
surprised or uncomfortable, but then 5 minutes later, you would never even know what happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas I think in settings where there's more neurotypical kids who maybe haven't done things like that as much, I think it's there is more risk of alienation and things like that, because our kids tend to stand out more, but here they don't. I mean, it's
Mhm.
only if those kinds of things are repeated.
Right.
So like we've talked before about the student who repeatedly has big reactions, but other than that, like you said, it's been 2 weeks and nobody's even, mentioned it. They
Yeah.
played the same game again the next week.
Hmm.
So that's one of the many spectacular things here, is that the kids, there's no grudges, there's
Mm.
no being upset with anybody.
No
Once,
judgment.
yeah, once the problem is solved, they all just move on.
Hmm.
And it's so beautiful.
It really is.
There's just a lot of grace for each other,
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say they accept that those kinds of things might happen, but they also accept that we're all learning, we're all
Mhm.
growing, we're all trying to figure out different things. And so some people might need help with something while others don't. And regardless of what that is, yeah, if it's an incident like that where it gets talked through and they get to see each other's side and they understand what's going on and why it happened, they're absolutely good to go. And yeah, they don't hold any grudges, like you said. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's very cool.
Mhm.
So from that story, I'm going to transition to another story, because same group of kids, same game, 1 week later. But this time there was just an extra flavor to it. So several of the same kids, plus one of the kids from our last episode, where we were talking about the kiddo who was really anxious, and we were finally able to get him into a game. He joined this group of kids that were playing Uno. So a week later, same group of kids, plus this new student for his first time in the group playing Uno. So now there's 5 kids in the group and they're playing Uno. And then the next time I look in, 2 of the kids that were sitting on the end of the table had started taking the Uno cards. And I think this set back when COVID was, in the summer of 2020, when we were able to reopen after lockdown, one of the challenges was, how do we play games when we're trying to do like germ control, right? How do we play games when we've got all these kids and they're touching everything. And so one of the things that we did was all of our games that have cards, we laminated the cards so that at the end of every day we could clean them. And we cleaned all the game boards and all the I mean, it was a whole thing. We had one staff member that was his job every day, was to clean all the games. So this set of Uno, the cards are all laminated from 3 years ago. So because of that, it makes them springy, right? And harder. So two of the kids had started picking up the cards and like popping them so that they would fly across the room, and they were having a blast. But another kid walked in and said, "What are you guys doing?" And one of the students who was not popping the cards said, "Well, we're trying to play Uno, but I don't remember how he said, they're tossing the cards around, or however he said it." And one of the students who was doing it said, "Well, you're saying it like we're doing something wrong." And so I stepped in and said, "There's nothing that's right or wrong, but what I notice is that," or I said, "How many of you guys want to actually play Uno?" And the other three kids who were not flicking the cards all raised their hand. So I said, "What I notice is that 3 of you guys want to play the game and 2 of you guys want to flick the cards." And one of the students said, what did she say? Something about how, well, they just decided to flick the cards. I don't really remember kind of how she was saying it, but it was basically, well, then she said, "Well, how about if we take half and they take half?" And I said, "But then they can't play an actual game of Uno, right? I mean, if they only have half a deck of cards, they can't really play a full game of Uno." So the kids decided, once they realized that there were 2 different groups that wanted to do 2 different things, because the 2 kids that were flicking the cards had no concept of that. They had no concept of the fact that the other 3 kids were kind of frustrated because they actually wanted to play the game. So once they got that concept, one of the kids said, "Well, let's take a vote. How many kids want to do this and how many kids want to do that?" And it turned 2 and 3, right? Just as they were, 2 and 3. And so one of the kids who was flicking said, "Well, 3 is more than 2. And so I think he said they win or something like that. At Starfish Social Club, we do not do voting. We do not outvote, because that teaches the people in the minority that their opinion doesn't matter because they're in the minority. And that is not what I want my students to learn. Everybody's opinion matters. So what we do instead, anytime something like this comes up, is we see if we can find a way where everybody can get what they want. So I know we had a story about this a couple months ago on an episode about kids using the fidget toys, and half the group wanted to use them one way and half the group wanted to use them the other way. And instead of putting it to a vote, we had them figure out a way where every student could get what they wanted. Oh my gosh, right? So that's what I did with Uno. Most of the kids in that group are newer. And so I let them know that, here at Starfish, we actually don't outvote each other because everybody's opinion matters. So I said, I do know that we have more than one game of Uno. So how do you guys think everybody in this group could get what they want? And then several of the kids were like, "Oh, we could get another deck." And so that's what they did, right? I asked somebody who knew where there was another deck to go get another deck. And then the 2 kids who were flicking the cards kept flicking the cards. And the 3 kids who wanted to play Uno played Uno. And they all stayed in the same room in the same group around the same table, doing 2 totally different things with 2 different decks of cards. But it was so many things in just that one interaction. It was helping the 2 kids recognize, oh, that's the conversation we had, that they had made the decision on what to do with the cards without even talking to the rest of the group. So that's part of the conversation we had, is that one person doesn't get to make decisions for the whole group without talking to anybody about it. Because that they really both felt like, well, the 2 of us decided we want to do this. But they were in a group of 5. And so 2 people don't get to monopolize the group and decide what everybody else is going to do or not do. So that was the first conversation, is coming to that understanding, and then helping them recognize that the other three kids were actually feeling frustrated because they couldn't even play the game they wanted to play. And then helping everybody realize that there's a way we can all get what we want out of this situation. So it's a really cool outcome from that situation. Everybody being able to play what they want, but more importantly, I think the understanding that let's find a way so that everybody can get this handled, instead of certain kids kind of dominating other kids, or majority rules, or whatever. So yeah, it's another one of our cool stories. So the next story I'm going to tell, not related, but involves one of the same students. So it involves one of the students who was flicking the cards and felt like it was okay because the two of them had decided that's what they wanted to do. So she is new. She has just been here for, she started with a couple weeks of game time before the break. And then she's now new into this cohort that we just started. So last week, we were talking about the concept of acquaintances in our lesson. The module that we're on now is all about relationships. So we were talking about the concept of acquaintances. And one of the expectations when we are an acquaintance with somebody is that we say hello when we see them. And if we want to, we can engage in small talk. And so we talked about, how are you? How's it going? How are you doing? But that they're normally just little conversations. We also talked about the idea that when it's an acquaintance, that question is not really a question. That question is a social nicety. And the other person expects that we will say something like, good, I'm okay, I'm fine, how are you? Okay, so that's a big conversation when we talk about acquaintances. That acquaintances are just people we know. They're not our friends. They're not our family. They're just people we know, but we don't have a relationship with them. And so acquaintances do not expect to hear that we're having a really bad day, that we're really tired, that we don't want to be here, anything like that. And this one student had a really difficult time understanding that. Some of what comes into play is that the kids tend to be very truthful and factual and honest. And so I think that was a big challenge for her. She felt like it wasn't honest to tell somebody that she was good if she'd had a horrible day. So one of the conversations we had is, no matter what's going on, we are always okay. We might not be good. We might not be great. We might not be happy. We might not be fine, but we are always okay. And how okay is a neutral word, right? And so you can use the word okay, even if you're having a crummy day, because you are okay. She struggled with that one still too. She wasn't really on board with that one. So then we started talking about the concept of complaining, which we talk about a lot here because our students are so honest and upfront and factual, they don't recognize the impact that complaining has on their reputation. And they often come across as complaining when in their perspective, they are just talking about what they think or how they feel. So she was really having a hard time with this concept. And so, we just kind of took a break and I explained that nobody likes to be around people who complain. We do not like to be around people who complain. So we typically complain with our parents, our friends, right? Our family, people that we're close to, but not people that we're not very close to, because it usually causes them to not want to be around us if we're always complaining when they are around us. And she still was just having a really hard time with why she couldn't just say what she was thinking or how she was feeling. And so I finally, one of our core concepts here is I finally just said to her, you can say whatever you want to. I do not want it to come across like I'm telling you what to say or what to do. You can say whatever you want to. If an acquaintance asks you how you are and you want to say that you've had a horrible day, you can absolutely say that. I just want you to understand that if you do that, that person is most likely not going to become a friend in the future. That person is most likely not going to choose to have conversations with you in the future. So again, it's completely your choice. But when we choose to complain to people that we don't know very well, it makes people feel awkward and uncomfortable, and they are less likely to keep wanting to engage with us. So that's, I think, the key piece. If we try to talk to our kids in terms of how their actions affect other people, or how their actions affect how other people feel, that's a pretty hollow discussion. So if I were to say to Ramiro, Ramiro, when I ask you how you're doing and you tell me that you're having a horrible day, that makes me feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, he might not care
Yeah.
because it makes him feel comfortable, right? It's what he wants to say. It's how he feels. So a lot of times the strategy that is used with kids is to use the feel. How do you think it makes that person feel? How would you feel if somebody said or did that to you? But that's a pretty hollow conversation. Not that our kids don't care if they say or do something that makes us feel upset, frustrated, uncomfortable, but it's sometimes not more important than what they want or what they want to say or what they want to do. So the way to close that is to expand upon when this person feels uncomfortable because you're complaining, they are not very likely to want to hang out with you next time. They are not very likely to want to play games with you next week. They, just like the conversation about the kiddo having the big reaction during game time. It's not about the fact that it makes the other kids uncomfortable.
Right.
It's what's the consequence of the other kids being uncomfortable. The natural social consequence is that the other kids will probably not want to play with him again next week if he keeps having big reactions. The natural social consequence of somebody complaining all the time, even if they don't think they are, but somebody answering the how are you question with I'm so bored, or I don't want to be here, or oh, it's been such a rough day, is that people are less likely to ask you how you are. So it's not about how what we do affects other people. It's about how what we do affects other people, which then affects their willingness to continue spending time with us. That's the full circle. And that's the piece that usually gets left out, is how the way other people feel that impacts their ability to want to keep spending time with us. Time is the biggest social reward. People giving their time and attention to us is the biggest social reward there is. Right? I mean, that's what a friendship is. A friendship is people who choose to spend time together. And so when people choose not to spend time with us anymore, that's a huge social consequence. And so that's what we're trying to get our kids to understand, is the way that people want to spend more time with us is when they feel comfortable around us, right? The way they want to spend less time with us is when they feel uncomfortable around us. So our role is to teach kids what are the things that contribute to each one of those. What are the things that contribute to people feeling more comfortable around you and less comfortable around you? And then you can do anything you want to. You can say and do anything you want to, but now you understand how that affects your ability to make and maintain relationships. So that was the conversation about complaining. She can complain as much as she wants to anybody she wants to, but now she understands how that affects her ability to make and maintain relationships. And that's our ultimate goal here, not to change what the kids say or do. That has to come from them. Our goal is to give them the information that helps them see that process play itself out. And then when they're here, it plays itself out naturally. If the kids feel uncomfortable with somebody, they'll go find someone else to play with. So it plays itself out naturally here. but we also get to make it explicit in the conversations that we have. All right. So that was that discussion. Anything else you want to add to that one?
No, that's perfect.
Okay. One more story to share. We mentioned on the last episode how we start on time. We respect, kids being here on time. We want to make sure everybody has the full use of their time here. We start on time. In game time, when somebody comes in late, it usually just means they might struggle a little bit to find something to do, because sometimes games are taken, groups are full, games have already started. In the lesson time, that's not the case, right? There's no groups or games or anything, but we're already in discussion mode. One thing that's really common for our students, and not just here, but when I was in the school system for a long time, it's really common in the school system too, is when kids come into an environment and everybody else is already established, they'll walk in and say something like, "Hey, what are we doing?" Right? Or, "Hey, where do I need to go? What do I need to do?" Happened last week.
Yes.
We had a student who came into class late. Everybody else is sitting. We do the same thing every week. We sit around the table. We have our lesson and there's nothing different going on, right? But he walks in and stops the class to say, he said something like, "Hey, what are we doing?" Or "What are we
Hey,
talking?
what are we talking about?"
Yeah, what are we talking about? And so I stopped the group and we taught this was an elementary group. We taught them the concept of reading the room. It's a pretty common expression, and it basically means to assess the situation, look at the context, and figure out what would be most appropriate for you to do. If you're walking into a lesson and there's 7 kids sitting around the table and Ramiro and I are sitting at the front, and you walk in and just take 5 seconds to assess the situation, you can figure out that what you should do is probably come in and have a seat, right? If you want to know what we're talking about, take 5 seconds, come in and listen, and you'll be able to figure out what we're talking about instead of interrupting the whole lesson. And so then we talked about the same thing in school. Sometimes kids get pulled out for therapies, for interventions, different things like that. And then they come in and their class is doing whatever. And so that's pretty common too, to walk in, "Hey, what are we doing?" Come in, stop in the doorway, maybe take 5 seconds to look at what everybody else is doing or listen to what people are talking about, and then figure out what you should be doing next. Is your class having a lesson? Do you need to come in and sit down quietly? Does your class have their reading book out? Do you need to come in and get your book out? Is your class in centers? Do you need to come in and figure out which center you're supposed to be in? Is it, PE, and you need to figure out what team to join? So instead of coming in and interrupting to ask questions about what you should be doing, instead of making it right about you, come in, read the room, and then make the choice that feels most appropriate. And that's not even about our kids. That's all, right? If you walk into a meeting late, if you show up somewhere that you've never been before, anything like that, where it's just a situation that is new to you, take 5 seconds to just look around, see what other people sitting down? Are they standing up? Are they talking? Are they not talking? Have people started eating yet? Have they not started eating yet? Right? Like some story I read about this woman who realized that nobody was eating the wedding cake yet. And so she went up and started cutting the wedding cake, right? Yes, it's a cliche to do what everybody else is doing, but generally speaking, in a social situation, that's actually what we want to look for. We want to look for what everybody else is doing. So that was our story about reading the room, is just helping our kids develop that awareness of coming in, taking 5 seconds to just figure out the context, figure out what everybody else is doing, and how can you fit into that as seamlessly as possible. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else to add to that one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Should be good.
Sometimes the kids, "Well, I'm here.
Oh
right? Like
yeah.
they'll open, I'm here. Or they'll walk in the door, sorry, I'm late.
Yeah, that's true.
So we definitely appreciate the sorry I'm late, right? We appreciate the acknowledgement, but preferably we would read the room, right? We would come in, figure out what's going on, and take our seat, and then wait for a break, and then say something like, sorry, I'm late. So we actually intentionally don't acknowledge kids when they come in late because we're trying to reinforce that. We're trying to reinforce that we don't stop class
Right.
because someone's come in late. So we actually don't acknowledge them until there's a break. And then we'll say something like, hey, so-and-so, I'm glad you're here, or whatever the case may be, just to
That's
kind of
very true.
reinforce that concept. Okay, so on our next episode, we are going to talk about our cohorts, which we don't talk about a whole lot, I think, because they run so smoothly.
Yeah.
Cohorts are groups that we have of our Starfish students who've been with us for at least a year, and they come together. We have different age groups. They come together, they plan their own events and activities as a group, and then we go do them together. So it's a lot of executive functioning. It's them having to work as a group to figure out where they're going. They have to figure out if the place is open. They have to figure out how much money they need, what kind of clothing we're wearing, if the weather's a factor, all kinds of stuff like that. And then all the things that come up when we go, because we go without parents. It's Ramiro and me and our group of kids. And so there's lots of things that come up that we notice that if the kids were with their parents are just maybe being done for them, or maybe not even being thought about, where with us, we're like, oh yeah, I don't do that. So lots of executive functioning going on in our cohorts, lots of life training, but always, in the social context that we have going on here at Starfish. So that's our plan for our next episode, is we'll do a deep dive into our cohorts and some of the stuff that we work on and support our students with in that context. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys again next time.